So, in 1860, a whole bunch of black folks in America, they were playing music. It was a combination of folk music, work songs, African music, and spirituals. They decided to name that the blues, and then they played it for about 30 more years, added a bunch of dance to it, and renamed it the boogie woogie. Now, if you took that blues and you added a good dose of folk music and a little bit of musical theater, that's what that green dot is, that's where you get ragtime. But if you let those spirituals sit for the same amount of time, you're going to get gospel. Now, if you let these blues ferment on their own, that's where you're going to get jazz from, right about 1920. But if you decide to add the blues and some of this musical theater-ass ragtime together, that's where you're going to get swing. Now, swing music, if you leave it alone, is going to turn into pop music. Not the stuff that's on the radio now, but the original. And just to make it hard for me to draw, if you connect these spirituals and this folk music over here around about 1920, you're going to get country music. That happened at the same time as swing and jazz, but my graph is off, so deal with it. You take the boogie-woogie, the jazz, and the gospel from over here, and you mix it all together, you're going to get rhythm and blues. Now, you let that country steep for a little bit, you're going to get bluegrass in 1940, and at the same time, people were combining boogie-woogie, jazz, and gospel to get rhythm and blues, also 1940. Now, the 1950s is a busy time for rhythm and blues, because if you combine it with gospel, you're going to get soul, but if you combine it with country, you're going to get rock and roll. On top of all that, that's when electronic instruments started to get popular. Those electronic instruments obviously play into rock and roll, but they play in twice as strongly into metal music in 1960. So 1960, electronic instruments are involved in everything. You get them involved in rock and roll, that's where you're going to get metal music. You get them involved in soul, that's where you're going to get funk music, and even more if you get them involved more in funk, and you get some of the European influence in there, that's where you're going to get disco, still in the 60s and 70s, by the way. These red dots you've been seeing represent strong and traceable Native American influences because 1960 is also when Jimi Hendrix invented psychedelia, somewhat from rock and roll music, but mostly due to the capacities of the electronic instruments at the time. That psychedelia, specifically the electronics of it, help feed into metal because that's where we get a lot of the distortion that we use in metal. You take rock and roll and this psychedelia and you mix it together, that's where you're going to take rock and roll and psychedelia and you add it to more musical theater, and that's where you're going to get industrial. And you see these blue dots represent European influences because Germany was big in helping the 1980s revolution of EDM, and even more so the 2000s movement of house. Now, disco's having a time of it, because disco is just funk and electronic music with a European accent, but then if you take that and you add a Caribbean accent and a couple of block parties, that's where you're going to get hip-hop. And the hip-hop movement started in the 1970s and immediately spawned rap, which sort of broke off as its own style of music and is now viewed as definitely its own style of music, but was definitely just a performance style of hip-hop when it first started. I am not the right person to explain that. And if you add it all together and give someone too much free time on the internet, that's where you get Vaporwave in 2010. I have